I feel a bit out of what I wanted to present, because I suggested I talk about the intended and the unintended. But it looks like the previous speakers have covered all of those items. Vandanaji talked about it very eloquently. Shastriji presented also very with amazing examples, and John here is detailed it even more in great depth. So I want to see if I can quickly regroup and give you something which was also in my mind about the intended and the unintended. Clearly, what has cost this bill to come about is the Brexit issue. And there are many landowners here in the country who are very concerned about this. There's news items saying farming as before is not going to be here in the UK. It'll all disappear in a few years' time if those subsidies that came in from Europe don't come in. And the reason for this bill is primarily to provide a transition period, about 7 years, for farmers to rethink how they can service. UK, as you know, is only 53% self-sufficient for its food. The rest has to come from many places. And most of it, as John says, comes in from Europe. And over the Brexit discussions, there were a lot of moves to see how to frame a relationship with the US. And I don't know how all that is going to go, but these are all the discussions. So this is the intended. This is what a lot of people want. But if you follow the debates in the House of Commons and the Lords, you will see how diverse the opinions are in terms of people who are discussing the bill. And this will go on. And what we are touching on is a very small detail within that bill, and eloquently elaborated by three previous speakers, especially John, who's touched on all the amazing details and unintended consequences. And these are very difficult to appreciate. I want to give a small example. In 1982, when I came to Cambridge to do my PhD, I came to do a PhD on genetic engineering of plants for disease resistance. It was a theoretical paper that brought me to Cambridge. And I happened to be in one of the first labs in the world to show how you can introduce genes into plants. And there was great excitement that this was easy to do. And that was 82. And 40 years on, it's not a very long period of time, 4 decades on, we have seen how the big players, Monsanto is no more. They cost a lot of havoc over the 40 years, and they are no more. So in a way, the errors self-correct. But 40 years is a long time, the damage they cost a long time, and the advantages they create for themselves to cost similar upsets and damage in other areas is also, 40 years is a long time for this. Now, the point I wanted to emphasize about the unintended consequence is more along the lines of the material and the immaterial. Now, a lot of the battles and the thinking that's going on relates to the material aspects. Everybody wants patents, as Vandanaji says, there are companies out there who just service patents and they make money out of this thing. Or there are people who want access to land, all the material aspects. And very little debate goes on here in our parliament, or for that matter, even in Brussels, on the immaterial aspects of the immaterial impacts of these interventions. And the immaterial goes into several dimensions, and as Raja Peter correctly pointed out, goes into corrupting better ways of thinking, the consciousness aspect. And it's something that we should not underestimate, the power of corrupting the mind, conveying a message of novelty. You're saying here is something that will do something very precise. And it doesn't take very long to go from there to corrupt policy making, to corrupt so many other ways of thinking. And this is, to me, is the biggest danger here, that we are sending out a message that conveys a certain way of thinking about a problem, a certain way of solving a problem, which has its advantages only for a few. And there are many who are left crippled by such policy making. And what John highlights is very important. I think the bill must be very clear in what it wishes, instead of being very vague. I think there are many parliamentarians who, in the debate, if you go through Hansard, you'll find they have highlighted this very flaky, the vagueness in the wording. And the speed at which this bill is being rushed through might not give people enough time to dissect those sections and to highlight, like what you're doing here. What you're doing here is a very important dissection, saying, what about this issue? What do you mean by precise breeding? You know, it's not very clear. Unfortunately, the bill is up in the House of Lords into the second reading. I don't know how much you can do, but I think people like Baroness Verma can do a lot about how one can reword things in the bill, even so late into its passage through the houses. I want to finish off with one example. Shastriji gave us several examples of even naturally bred varieties of medicinal plants and the ill effects they have, including a product from Zandu. And there are many more examples like this. You know, we have crossbred pepper lines, which presumably carry a high amount of piperin, but may have off effects when used in a medicinal product for humans. The example I want to give is of rice. And when we look at India and the number of traditional rice varieties that are grown in India, I've heard discussions now in several places about editing to reduce the height of these rice plants. You know, some of the older varieties are about 60 centimeters or more tall. And there is a feeling that we've understood so much about the genetics of rice that it would be very easy to reduce the height of these plants by introducing as little as one base change in one gene. And for a lot of people, this is very tempting because there is a wish to bring back these old land races. And what do you do if the farmer wants to grow a certain variety and he or she learns of this technology and approaches the ministry to ask for a single gene edit to be done to get a dwarf version of a traditional rice variety? Now, I don't know how to solve this problem. I don't know what the answer is. The call is a good call. The request is, it seems a very valid request. How do you resolve this problem? So I've taken the problem out of Europe, where we see polarized views on the continent versus UK. There is no commonality in how the European courts have decided on something and where Europe wants to go. And you can see, even in small Europe, we see polarization. When we move this across to a completely different environment, that is India, where the farming system is different. Instead of 3% who are farming, 65 to 75% are on the farm. The land holdings are very tiny, and the farmer is a subsistence farmer. And there is a demand to the ministry in Delhi saying, you know, we have these old varieties. Can you do something to reduce the height with gene editing? I don't know how to resolve this. I don't know, maybe John or maybe Raja Peter here or Vandanaji might be able to guide us through this, how those strong sentiments that come from the subsistence farmers, how do you satisfy this? Is there a way out? My mind says there might be a way out, which is just traditional breeding, which Vandanaji touched on. And maybe there is a way to do this very quickly. There are speed breeding techniques now. Maybe this is the way out. And maybe what is happening here in Europe and the polarized vision that we are seeing with the trade wars going on between Europe and Brexit, Britain, and its wish to liaise with America for its trade deals, maybe that should be left aside. And, individual nations must bring on strong policies saying, we don't want this technology the way it is. We will find alternatives for our local needs. And with countries like India and China and possibly the BRICS nations, the other partners coming together, we might arrive at a new formula. And this new formula will take into account the immaterial values, how this technology impacts social fabric. We are just getting to that point where we are starting to respect the Sustainable Development Goals. And we talk about employment generation, we talk about education, we talk about natural resources. And we are starting to find our way through this jungle. We see the 17 directions that are all interconnected. And maybe there is a new dialogue that will come somewhere that will respect not the tangible value addition, which is what the West is debating and fighting about, but a respect for the intangible value addition. And maybe we will start to see, and maybe out of that thinking will also come out the new consciousness, the awareness that Vandanaji and Raja Peter is highlighting. It might come out of understanding how the local farmer is much more intimately connected with the environment. And there is maybe we will learn to formalize those requests, and maybe we will learn to present them, and maybe we will find a way to put values on these things. Just like the carbon credit, we might start to put values on this by saying, if your program does not add up to all these things in terms of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and in terms of cultural sensitivities, and in terms of local needs, we might not get there. I finish off with one example to put some numbers onto this. India has divided into states, as you well know. And if you look at the areas for the different states, the one I want to highlight is Uttar Pradesh. In terms of land area, Uttar Pradesh is the 4th largest state in India. The total land area of Uttar Pradesh is about the same, maybe a few, just marginally a little more than the 4 nations of the United Kingdom. It's about 243,000 square kilometers. That is the state of Uttar Pradesh, and which is the size of the United Kingdom. Uttar Pradesh has 75 administrative districts. It has 97,000 villages. And these are villages that have existed there forever. We've all heard about the Bhagavad Gita and the Mahabharata and all these stories. And we've heard about Kashi and the temples. These are places that have been there forever. And maybe when we take technologies of this kind and the outcomes and put it into situations like this and saying, is this going to benefit any of these farmers in these villages? We have 230 million people in Uttar Pradesh compared to 64 million in the UK. And once we start to work with these numbers, we start to realize what places like India can do to sway policy and thinking. So the unintended consequence of this is if it infiltrates into parts of the world that can be a counterbalance for happenings in other parts of the world. And if we lose sight of that, then we are in danger. I'm happy there is a conflict here in Europe. Britain's decided to come out. It will not agree with the policies that are framed by the European Court of Justice about the GM modification. I can see this tension staying here, but to keep other parts of the world immune to this tension in how we develop the future. And there are opportunities here to use this as a leverage, to leverage several other discussions that are going on here in the UK in terms of health and healthcare and health versus healthcare discussions. There are ways to use this as a way to leverage discussions going on in Brussels. So in a way, I feel there are unintended consequences of this ongoing debate. Whether the minds in Parliament are sharp enough to see all this, I don't know. But having discussed with people in Uttar Pradesh last night who are keen to grow their economy, the state GDP to $1 trillion GDP in the next 5 years, I feel very optimistic that it is much easier to get these messages into India and then use India as a force to rebalance discussions in other parts of the world. So, Amarjeet, I leave you there with those thoughts. Thanks for asking me to join this gathering. I've given you some thoughts. I've tried to improvise based on what I was discussing with people in Uttar Pradesh yesterday. Hence, all these figures are fresh in my mind. And I feel the world is so interconnected today. The day Uttar Pradesh wakes up, maybe the rest of Europe will have to do something else or something along those lines. So thank you, Amarjeet. I think this is the way politics of the future is going to work. You know, there are unintended consequences of certain things. Thank you so much.
Thank you so